We're going to be in Joshua chapter 2 this evening, Joshua chapter 2. Last week we looked at the first chapter of Joshua, which we really could describe as being the call of Joshua, and Joshua kind of taking control of things and beginning to give direction for the people of Israel and taking over after the passing of Moses. And when we get into chapter 2, we have an account of Joshua sending 2 spies into the land before they crossed over Jordan, specifically with the intent of scouting out Jericho and being one of the first places that they would go. While in Jericho, or while the 2 spies are in Jericho, the king of Jericho discovers them being, or hears of them being there and sends some to arrest them, no doubt with the intent of putting them to death. We see in this account, really the focus has to do more with the individual that is responsible for saving these 2 spies, one that's very well known in Rahab, who is also known as Rahab harlot. So we have here the spies being saved from an unlikely woman, an unlikely individual in this. And we see from it, even though you would look at her history, you'd look at these things, that she ends up becoming and one of the things we'll talk about is she ends up becoming she of course saves them with us, and we see that she shows her faith in accepting the Lord. And we just recently finished Hebrews, and in Hebrews chapter 11, she's even mentioned as being a woman of faith. And so we're going to look at that, and we'll look at a couple other things about this too as we're going through here. But it's a very unlikely of heroes in this story, but a very great hero nonetheless, and one that also proves to the spies that the Lord is on their side and is going to help them to be victorious in conquering this city, this land. So let's have a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for each of those that are here this evening, I pray that we would each be ready to hear your word, would each be receptive to it, that you would soften our hearts, that you would show us your truth, help us to humble ourselves and to accept it for the message that you have for us. I pray that you would guide and direct us now as we're going through it. Please give me the words to speak and clarity, that everything ultimately, though, would be for your honor, glory, and your will. In Jesus' name, amen. We begin here, chapter 2 of Joshua, starting in verse 1. And it says here, and Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go, view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into the harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. We'll look at it, we'll see it later on, but the events that take place in this chapter indicate to us that it took longer than 3 days' time for the spies to go into the land, to spy it out, and to come back. And one of the things that we saw back in chapter 1 in verse 11, that Joshua, when he gave the command for the people in the second half of the chapter, that he tells them, verse 11, he says, Pass through the host and command the people, saying, Prepare you victuals, for within 3 days ye shall pass over this Jordan to go and to possess the land which the Lord your God giveth you to possess it. We see this command here that he gives to them, saying, hey, in 3 days' time, we're going to be crossing the Jordan, and we're going to go in the land, and we're going to start taking it. We're going to start possessing it. And he's very confident in this time, and he's saying that, this is going to take place. And so, really, I would take chapter 2 and place it between verses 9 and then verse 10 with this in chapter 1. Because as I mentioned, and we see later on in the chapter, that they actually spend 3 days hiding from the king's men And so you put all that, with them spending 3 days hiding, we could say at the minimum probably a day being spent getting into Jericho, and then a day getting home after hiding for 3 days. And so we're looking at 4 or 5 days minimum here if the spies are gone, and they may have even been gone longer than that. And that doesn't fit with this 3 days time, because why would Joshua be saying, hey, we're going to go into the land and we're going to start taking the land, whenever the spies had not returned or had not even been sent yet. So it's likely here that it takes place within these 2 times, which as when you look and you study in Scripture, it is not anything, especially in the Old Testament, is not anything out of the ordinary for timelines to kind of jump back and forth with things depending on it. We see probably the one that we're most well known of, most familiar with, is in the account of creation, that it gives us the 6 days of creation, or 7 days of creation, and then again we have the retelling of the creation of man, of Adam and Eve in the following chapters. So it's not something that is uncommon. There's plenty of other places. So this doesn't necessarily cause any problems for us, or it doesn't cause any problems. The timeline here, of course, being a little bit before they go into the land, as you would think. But Joshua here in verse 1, we see that he sets 2 men to go into the land to spy it out. And they come to the city of Jericho. And we see that when they are in Jericho, that they go and they come to a harlot's house named Rahab and lodge there. Now you may be thinking, well, what do 2 Israel spies have to do with going to a harlot's house? And something that is very common within it for someone that is a harlot like Rahab is to also have basically an inn, which your 2 travelers coming into the city, it'd be very natural to go and find a place to get a bed for the night or to get some food to eat. And we see as well that her location is on the wall, which would again indicate a very prime place for an inn. You're close to it. We even see kind of the way things are written when they're talking about the gate and things. It seems that she's even close to the gate itself, which again lends the idea that most likely she was also an innkeeper in her home. So they went there to get some food, maybe a bed for the night. We continue and look into verse 2, and it says, And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. And we find out that the king hears about these men coming in. And if you think about this being an inn, there would have been a lot of other people there, locals as well, getting some food or spending time there. And just they came into the city. They're going to be outsiders, unknown to people very quickly. And we see later on that the people of Jericho and others in the land are very well aware of Israel and the things that are going on. And so they probably knew that Israel was close by on the other side of Jordan, and were looking for them. But we see that the king hears about it. And so in verse 3 it says, And the king of Jericho sent unto Rahab, saying, Bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thy house, for they be come to search out all the country. We see that he comes and he requests of Rahab to pull these men out, to turn them over to her. And we see in verse 4, it says, And the woman took the 2 men and hid them and said thus, There came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for ye shall overtake them. And so Rahab says, I saw the men come in. I saw them come in, but once it started getting dark and it got about time for the gate to close, they left. I would assume to leave the city, as you would expect people to do that need to leave the city right before the night hits. And so she says they've left, and if you go quickly, you might catch them. It's really of course, this is great that she's telling them this, and it's also very intelligent as well, because she's kind of giving them the opportunity, giving them reason to quickly leave and to not search the place and to look to see if she's telling the truth or not. Because she says, "Hey, they already left, but if you hurry, you'll be able to catch them." Well, they're thinking if they went out of the city, if we tarry, if we go slow, we may not catch them. So let's go. Let's go quickly. And we continue with this, and it says in verse 6, "But she had brought them up to the roof of the house and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof." It is very common for them to have these stalks of flax up on the roof. The roofs were built to be flat. It was a very normal thing to use the tops of the roofs for different things. It was oftentimes a place of entertainment in a home as well here. And so, but just within the time that they would harvest it and be setting it out on the roof for it to dry. So this wasn't an uncommon thing to have on her roof. And she takes this opportunity to hide the men in it, just in case they come in and they search and they really look hard to find these men. But we see in verse 7, it says, "And the men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. And as soon as they which pursued after them were gone out, they shut the gate." So they didn't really, it's not indicated here if they really searched, they just immediately took and they ran and they tried to get out of the city as quickly as possible, heading towards Jordan, just showing that they knew where Israel was. They were on the other side of Jordan. So they go after them, trying to catch them. As we continue here, we've seen Rahab hides the spies to save them, and now we see that Rahab has a request for the spies to save her in return. We look at verse 8, It says, "And before they were laid down, she came up unto them upon the roof. And she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you." She states here, and she says, while she's hiding them, before she does, she tells them, "I know that the Lord has given this land to you. I know that you are going to be successful when you come up against us." And she says that not only that, but the whole land is scared of you. The whole land knows what is getting ready to take place. And she says in verse 10, the reason why that they're all scared, that she is convinced that the Lord is going to help them. Verse 10, it says, "For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, when ye came out of Egypt, and what ye did to the two kings of the Amorites that were on the other side Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed." Well, see here, she says, and the reason why is because we heard about what happened whenever you left Egypt. And we heard about the drying up of the Red Sea so that you could walk across. And I think what is also indicated here is that it also destroyed the Egyptian army when this happened. And this is 40 years previous. And they're still very much so aware of what had happened. Very much so remembering, this is what happened. And also another thing that happened just shortly after they left Egypt, still we're looking at around 40 years or so since it happened, as it talks about the defeat of two different Amorite kings, Sihon and Og. And if we go over into Numbers in chapter 21, we see this account. Numbers in 21. Looking at verses 21 through 35. Numbers 21, starting in verse 21. It says, And Israel sent messengers unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, Let me pass through thy land. For we will not turn into the fields, nor into the vineyards. We will not drink of the waters of the well, but we will go along by the king's highway until we pass by thy borders. And Sihon would not suffer Israel to pass through his border, but Sihon gathered all his people together and went out against Israel into the wilderness, and he came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. So Israel was at this time traveling on their way to the promised land, the first time that they get there. And they are wanting to basically take a shortcut through the Amorite home, through the Amorite land. And they come and they say, hey, we want to be able to pass through. We're not going to touch any of your food. We're not going to touch any of your water. We're not going to touch anything. We're just going to stay on your highway, your main road of travel, and we're just going to go right through, and we're not going to stop until we're outside of your borders. We're not going to bother you. You aren't even going to hardly know that we were here. And he says, no. And he doesn't just say no. He gathers up his army and he goes to attack Israel, who has done nothing to cause any problems. Has done nothing to, they just asked to be able to pass through the land. And so we continue, and he says in verse 24, And Israel smote him with the edge of the sword, and possessed his land from Meron unto Jabbok, even unto the children of Ammon, for the border of the children of Ammon was strong. And Israel took all these cities, and Israel dwelt in the cities of the Amorites, in Heshbon, and in all the villages thereof. For Heshbon was the city of Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab, and taken all his land out of his hand, even unto Arnon. Wherefore they that speak in Proverbs said, Come into Heshbon, let the city of Sihon be built and prepared. For there is a fire gone out of Heshbon, a flame from the city of Sihon. It hath consumed Ar of Moab, and lords the high places of Arnon. Woe to thee, Moab! Thou art undone, O people of Chemosh. He hath given his sons that escaped, and his daughters into captivity unto the Sihon king of the Amorites. We have shot at them. Heshbon is perished, even unto Dibon. We have laid them waste, even unto Nopab, which was reached unto Medeba. Thus Israel dwelt in the land of the Amorites. And Moses sent to spy out Jahaziel, and they took the villages thereof, and drove out the Amorites that were there. And turned and went up by the way of Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, went out against them, and he and all his people, to battle of Edrei. And the Lord said unto Moses, Fear him not, for I have delivered him from thy hand, and all his people and his land, and thou shalt do to him as thou didst unto Sihon king of the Amorites, which dwelt at Heshbon. So they smote him and his sons and all his people, until there was none left him alive, and they possessed his land. So we see that instead of just having the people of Israel pass through their land, they decided to cross Israel. And so Israel just defeated them and took the land for themselves. And so Rahab is talking about it, and she's saying, we heard about this. We heard about these events and how you guys, as a very young nation, just leaving Egypt, came and defeated these nations who were very well fortified, were very strong nations in their military. It tells us they had strong borders, and they had taken the land from another nation. So they weren't just anybody. And Israel defeated them like they were nobody. So Rahab, she says, we heard about that. We heard about what happened. And so we know that God is going to give us over to you. There's nothing we can do about it. So if we go back to Joshua in chapter 2, and we look at verse 11. It says, As soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Rahab continues and says, And when we heard this, all of the people of our land lost all hope of defending, because we knew that the Lord was going to cause you to win. We knew that your God was superior. But Rahab is not just And she makes the statement that God is the God of heaven and earth. And Rahab is not just saying this as in your God is greater than my God kind of thing. Which a lot of times, there's a lot of times in Scripture that we see individuals saying it, God is a great God. And oftentimes the way they're referring to it is He is a God that is very great, not the God. Now Rahab does say this here, that He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. But we also, if we remember in Hebrews 11 and verse 31, it says, by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believe not, when she received the spies with peace. So we're actually told in Hebrews chapter 11, the faith chapter, that she was a woman of great faith and that she had trusted in the Lord. She, at this point in time in saying that she was a saved woman. I want you to notice here that all of these nations were confident in the Lord's ability because Israel followed Him. They were worried about it, and they saw His glory, they saw His strength, because Israel was following Him. And I want you to realize this, and this is always the case. When we follow the Lord, His glory is shown in our lives. The things that we do, and us following the Lord, and us being within His will, it provides evidence to other people of the Lord's greatness. They may still choose to reject it, but it still makes the point. But Rahab, she chose to accept. And so in verse 13, verse 12, she says, now therefore, I pray you, swear unto me by the Lord, since I have showed you kindness, that ye will also show kindness unto my father's house, and give me a true token, that ye will save alive my father, my mother, and my brethren, and my sisters, and all that they have, and deliver our lives from death. Rahab is so confident in the Lord that she even asks of the spies to protect her, and thereby asking of the Lord to protect her. Not only her, but also all of her home. And she requests that they leave a token to prove this promise. That would be something that also she could present to other Israelites to prove, hey, I was given this promise that I'm to be saved. You don't want to have to rely on these two guys making it back on the battlefield to you to spend everybody else off. You want something that you can show and say, hey, they said that I'm saved. I have this. And so So when we continue and we look at verse 14, it says, and the men answered her, our life for yours. If ye utter not this our business, and it shall be, when the Lord hath given us the land, that we will deal kindly and truly with thee. Men answer and they say, since you saved us, we will return the favor, and we will save you. Verse 15, it says, then she let them down by a cord through the window, for her house was upon the down wall, and she dwelt upon the wall. And she said unto them, get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you, and hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned, and afterward may ye go your way. She lets them down upon the window, or upon the wall, which she had a window that was upon the wall, and gives them a little bit more advice and says, hey, go up into the mountains, hide there for 3 days. In 3 days, your pursuers, they will have returned, and you can go and you can be on your way. Because if you remember, those that were pursuing them, they took off heading towards Jordan. And so if the spies had left straight from there and started heading back to Jordan, well, what may have happened? They would have come back across them. Another indication here, as I talked about the timing of this, is very clearly something that is longer than that of the 3 days previous that Joshua gives before they go in. The fact that she told them 3 days is how long they would have waited may even indicate how long it would have taken to travel that distance as well, to the camp and to back, and that she was able to say very clearly here, 3 days is how long it'll take them to travel there and to come back to know whether or not they caught you. We continue here now, and we see more of Rahab's faith. In verse 17, notice this, it says, "And the men said unto her, We will be blameless of this thine oath which thou hast made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window which thou didst let us down by. And thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren and all thy father's household home unto thee. And it shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of thy house unto the street, his blood shall be upon his head, and we will be guiltless. And whosoever shall be with thee in the house, his blood shall be upon our head, if any hand be upon him." I want us to notice here a few different things of a comparison being made here. The beginning is they have this scarlet thread that she let them down, a red thread and the red rope, and they tell her, "Keep this. And whenever we come, and we come to take, I want you to hang this outside of your window, and it'll be a sign to all of Israel to leave you alone." Now, I want us to notice from this is the fact that it is clearly identified here as being a scarlet thread. They didn't just mention it as being the rope that you laid out, but it's a scarlet rope. And this may seem to be insignificant, but with the Lord, everything's significant. And throughout the Old Testament, we actually see a few different mentions of the color of a scarlet thread. You actually have in Genesis chapter 38, 27 through 30, you have the account of the twins of Tamar when she is giving birth, and the firstborn having a scarlet thread tied around his wrist to mark the firstborn. Then in Exodus 26 and 1, shows the scarlet yarn as being part of the tabernacle's curtains. And then again, 28 and 6, the scarlet yarn on the high priest's ephod. And as well here, when we're looking at the scarlet thread, it's used in the same manner as that of the Passover lamb's blood that we see in Exodus 12 and 13 in Egypt. And that putting the red upon the doorpost and upon the lintel that the angel would pass over. And it may have even been that they were thinking of this instance even at this time, but definitely this is pointing to the same thing that all of these things pointed to, which is the blood of Christ. And the Passover lamb clearly points that symbol. What we have here in this symbol of these instructions is a symbol, a shadow for us as well, but it is also a token of such, showing God's grace and forgiveness upon Rahab for her past mistakes and in accepting her. We're told as well, she's also told in verse 19 that she said, "Hey, put this scarlet thread outside of your home, but anybody that does not stay within the home, anybody that does not come into the home, anybody that's wandering out in the streets when all this happens, their blood is upon themselves." The only place of protection here is within your home. Very clearly defines how the salvation is achieved for herself and for also her family. They say you got to stay within the home. This is very much so like the free gift of salvation. And that any that refuse the instructions that God gives does not have the salvation that God offers. Now, God provides very clear instructions in the way that we are to be saved, in that through Christ and trusting in Him. Anyone that does otherwise is taking their own death upon themselves. And having rejected, because the Lord tells us that all are made aware of it, all are given the opportunity, and so any that reject, they've taken it upon themselves. And these spies, they're giving the same thing here. It's saying, you have this opportunity, all you have to do it this way, and you will be saved. That you reject, and it's your own fault. Now, the Lord does not force hell upon anybody, but cannot save anybody if they reject His free gift. We ourselves are the ones that send ourselves to hell if we reject. God is required to do it because of His righteousness, because of justice. But He's provided a very free gift, very easily accessible free gift. And all they have to do is accept. And then one final command that they give to her. Look at this, verse 20. It says, "If thou utter this our business, then we will be quit of thine oath which thou hast made us to swear." And they get one final thing, and they say, "And you cannot tell anybody about what has happened between us today." What they're saying is you can't go back and tell the king and tell the rest of the city. And of course, she's going to have to tell her family, because they're to be saved, but they're saying, don't be spreading, don't betray us. Another part that this symbolizes that of the free gift of salvation is that she is being required to commit to them and to not go back on her previous life. That she is now supposed to be following the Lord, trusting in the Lord, and not to go back to those of Jericho, the world symbolized here. The same as for us. We must repent and remove our loyalty to our flesh and commit to the Lord. Verse 21, we see that she says, "And she said, according unto your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed, and she bound the scarlet line in the window." We see that she does agree to their terms. And when you go to Matthew in chapter 1 and verse 5, you actually see that Rahab is in the lineage of Christ. As these events that took place here, the Lord saw it fit to make her to be a part of bringing the Messiah into this world. Which I think is a very important thing to take notice here in the forgiveness of God, because this story begins by calling her Rahab the harlot. And the story ends with Rahab in the lineage of Christ. And we see as well in Hebrews chapter 11, and what we looked at, we see her identified as being a woman of great faith as well. In a list of choosing those of the greatest faith, Rahab is mentioned. Regardless of one's previous circumstances, regardless of someone's previous path, does not negate the ability to be a great follower of Christ. Be one that is forgiven and is used by God in mighty ways. And Rahab in this instance was used to save these two men, but it is likely as well that the reason you send spies is to get valuable information. It's likely these men had good information for that. Even in the case of Jericho, of course, the walls, the Lord caused it to fall down, but then Israel had to come into the city and conquer it and to attack it. There's still information that would have been nice to know where certain buildings are, where the king's palace is, maybe some ways to get into it, different ways to, places to avoid that might cause you to be lost. There's information that these spies had that was still probably very valuable and was protected by the Lord. It was made possible because of Rahab. We see as we continue here, the spies return back to Israel. We see verse 22. They do take the advice of Rahab. It says, and they went and came unto the mountain and abode there 3 days until the pursuers were returned. And the pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but found them not. Our pursuers, they went all the way back to where Israel was, pursuing them, looking for them, trying to get them, find them wherever they could. And they could not find them because of Rahab's instructions. We continue verse 23. It says, so the two men returned and ascended from the mountain and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun and told him all the things that befell them. They get back and they account to Joshua all these things that happened. In verse 24 it says, and they said unto Joshua, truly the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of this country do faint because of us. I want you to notice the difference in this account versus the account when they first came. When they first came, he said, we fear the people. We will be defeated. We need to run. They weren't following God then. They weren't trusting Him. Now, they're trusting the Lord. These spies, I think one of the things they were talking about the 3 days that they were in the mountains was how the Lord protected them with Rahab. And that the Lord was protecting them, the Lord was preparing them to win. They were probably very excited about hearing that the people were very confident in the Lord's ability. And so they get back this time and they say, the Lord's on our side. We're going to win. We're going to be victorious. We're going to conquer. The difference this time is that the people of Israel, these two spies specifically in this instance in their words, they were trusting God. And so they had a very different response to what they saw in the land. What they saw in the land was, this is going to be our land. This is going to be for us to take. The Lord is giving this to us. And so in 24 it says, and they said unto Joshua, truly, the Lord hath delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. Whenever we have faith in the Lord and we are following the Lord's plan and we're doing the things that the Lord has told us to do, we gain confidence. And regardless whatever is taking place before us, regardless what direction we're going to have to go, even though it's hard, because nowhere in this is it said that it was easy for them to take the land. They still had to fight. As I mentioned, even with the walls of Jericho, when they came down, they still had to go into the city and take the city. They just didn't have to deal with the defenses of the wall. It still required effort on their part. It still required good planning with the Lord's leadership. But they were successful. And they were confident they were going to be successful because they had been following God. The Lord had spent 40 years teaching them, hey, I'm going to take care of you. They spent 40 years being fed by manna and being given water from a rock. See, things are much different this time around because they had faith in God. Things can be much different for us. If we choose to not trust the Lord, if we choose to not have confidence in Him, to not follow Him, you'll have much different results than if you trust Him, you rely on Him, and you march on, ready to go with Him as your guide, as your deciding factor. Do we have any prayer requests?